Welcome to the September 14th work session of the Ann Arbor City Council. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner? Oh, Councilmember Hayner, it looks like he's here, but he's still muted. Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Councilmember Griswold?
Here.
Councilmember Lum?
Here.
Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman? Absent. Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson? Here. Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Rumlawi?
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'll note that Councilmember Ackerman is in the waiting room, and he'll be joining us in just a moment.
Thank you very much. We have for us work session number 1, pedestrian and bicycle program data analysis. Mr. Hupy, you have the con.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. With us tonight, we have the City Engineer, Nick Hutchinson, and the Transportation Manager, Raymond Hess. And Raymond will lead us through the presentation tonight on pedestrian and bicycle programs and data analysis. Raymond?
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, thanks for the opportunity. I am going to turn off my video just to hopefully preserve a little bit of bandwidth while I cycle through the presentation. So bear with me while I switch over to that.
Raymond, if you give me a second, if you're presenting, I will make you a co-host so you have that ability.
Very good, thank you. Right. I think it picked the wrong screen. Are you seeing the one with the kind of split screen to the right, or is it a full screen?
Pedestrian and bicycle programs data analysis.
It looks good.
Okay, good. It looks like it's showing a different screen, but thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, Raymond Hess, Transportation Manager. So I'm going to go over the following points as part of my presentation. The first is an overview of crash reports and characteristics. Then we'll talk about how those kind of help inform strategies. And then we'll dive a little bit more in a little bit more detail into specific initiatives we have related to pedestrians and bicycling. And then I'll give you a quick little update on healthy streets, traffic calming, and then ultimately end with the transportation plan update. So the first couple set of slides I'm going to present is related to crash reports. And I do want to highlight that I'm pulling from 2 different reports. This is important to note because some of the data sets, while I think the overall message is consistent, some of the data sets are a little bit different. So for example, this first set of slides I'm going to show you come directly from a fresh off the presses crash report that was produced by staff. That includes data all the way through 2019. That data became available this summer. I think it was June or July when that data became available. The slides that precede that, though, are from a different report that only includes data up to 2018. So I just want to highlight that difference right now, just before I forget later. So we started last year developing an annual crash report because we thought it was very important for us to understand what the data is telling us related to where and why crashes are happening, and especially related to our vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists. What is their kind of experience related to safety, and making sure we really understand kind of those influences so that we can develop strategies to effectively address them. So what you see before you is the sum of all of our crashes over a 10-year period from 2010 to 2019. You'll see that the total number of crashes that we experience within the city of Ann Arbor in any given year hovers right around 3,000 crashes, which is a fairly large number to really kind of wrap your head around. However, one of the things to really note is that when we talk about Vision Zero and we talk about really achieving, you know, no fatal or no serious crashes, or what we call incapacitating crashes, we're really looking at a much smaller data set of the overall total. And so what I've done here is just kind of highlight on this first slide the specific things that we'll be breaking out. So this next slide kind of takes that bottom row and magnifies it up. So you know, just because the bars are the same height, they are different measures on the y-axis that you can see. So when we talk about all fatal and incapacitating crashes, we're looking at about somewhere between 25, 27 is our 5-year rolling average. I will note that these graphs do include a 5-year rolling average. That's kind of the bar that goes along the top. And this is important because this is a Federal Highway Administration kind of best practice, whereby acknowledging that there could be fluctuations in any given year, it's important to kind of take a rolling average of 5 years at a time, so that way you can really see what the long-term trends are. So you can see on both of those that we are leveling off and maybe even declining. Part of that is because the 2014 was unfortunately a bad spike, and you'll see that reflected in the bicycle and pedestrian crashes as well. 2014 fell off of the 5-year average this year, so that's why you're starting to see the downward trend. So just keep that number in mind. At the end of the day, when we talk about Vision Zero, it really is a focus on the graph to the right, the kind of orange bars. We're talking about the 25, 27 crashes on average that we experience. So let's look specifically at pedestrians and cyclists. So the first set of charts I'm going to show you are related to pedestrian crashes. So unfortunately, in 2019, we did see an uptick in total pedestrian crashes. So we did jump up to nearly 70 crashes when we were down below. We were probably around 55 or so. However, again, what I want to highlight is kind of the area specific to those fatal and incapacitating crashes. And so if we break that out specifically, we're looking actually at a steady number. Again, that number is too high, so I don't want to sugarcoat any of this. Any fatality or any serious crash is one too many. So when we talk about 8, that is 8 too many. But I do want to, again, kind of continue to kind of keep it in perspective in terms of when we are focused on those fatal and incapacitating, those numbers have actually remained relatively constant. And you see that, you know, in 2014, there was that spike that I mentioned. And now that that is kind of out of the 5-year data set, you're starting to see kind of the downward trend that reflects the 15, 16, 17 lower numbers. And then 18 and 19, we're at 8. With bicycle crashes, again, a similar sort of narrative. We're seeing a leveling off of crashes. Again, that's not victory. So I just want to reemphasize the fact that we're not complacent, we're not satisfied with those results. But we are starting to at least see a downward trend on those 5-year rolling averages. So if we focus again on the serious and fatal crashes, you'll see that this is what our trend line looks for bicycle serious crashes. Now, 2019 did show an increase in the serious crashes. That went from 2 in 2018 to 5 in 2019. So that is something that we are looking into in a little bit more detail. I should note that this report that you're getting a sneak peek of tonight will be presented to the Transportation Commission this Wednesday. And then once we get kind of their final review of it, we will pass the final report on to you. Included in the appendix of that transportation crash report is a supplemental analysis specific to pedestrian crashes, because that was something we heard from the Transportation Commission to do a deeper dive. So we took, you know, these lines that you see, and we dug down deeper to really go into the crash reports that are called UD-10s. Those are the forms that are filled out by the law enforcement officers. And we actually kind of pulled the narrative out to see, you know, what happened, you know, what were the causes of the crash, what were kind of the conditions surrounding the crash. And so we have a supplemental analysis that you'll see hopefully as early as next month on that subject as well. So now what I'd like to do is transfer over to the Mobility Factbook. This is a deliverable that was in the early stages of the Transportation Plan update. I'll end my presentation talking about the Transportation Plan update in more detail, but this is the comprehensive plan element related to transportation. And it is Vision Zero focused. It's actually titled Moving Together Towards Vision Zero. It's very data driven. It's very much focused on achieving Vision Zero and zero fatal crashes and zero incapacitating crashes. But I think the next couple slides really kind of illustrate the importance of focusing on our most vulnerable road users, in particular bicycle and pedestrians. So the first thing to note is that 20% of our commuters are doing so by active modes of transportation. So this is bicycling and walking. And I should note that this is a pretty remarkable number. We are actually one of the top in the nation in terms of people who take transit, bike, or walk within the community. So this is something that should be celebrated. But there is a dark side to that statistic as well, that though only 20% of those work-related trips are done by bicycling and walking, they account for 36% of our serious injury crashes. And perhaps more startling is the fact that among the fatalities in the community, they represent over half of people who are killed in our roadway were either walking or biking. So you can see that there's a disproportionate burden on people who are walking and biking in terms of the burden that they bear related to safety and fatal and incapacitating injuries, which is why you as City Council and the city have really prioritized trying to improve, especially the pedestrian environment and the bicycling environment through infrastructure improvements and other initiatives. One of the things I should note, and I think many of you have probably seen a slide similar to this, is kind of this geometric curve that suggests the danger that pedestrians and non-motorized users experience when they're involved in a crash with a motor vehicle relative to the speed that they're going. So if a pedestrian is struck by a vehicle which is going 20 miles per hour, the chance of survival is 90%. You know, that's a fairly notable survival rate, but you'll see that that number quickly diminishes the faster the vehicle is going. So at 30 miles per hour, 20% would result in a fatality, but just a mere 10 miles per hour faster would result in 70% resulting in a fatality. So 7 out of 10 would result in a fatality at 40 miles per hour. So this really speaks to the notion that, you know, speed kills. And if we can really look at strategies that can help reduce the speed of vehicles, crashes may still happen, but at least we lower the risk of them resulting in a fatal and incapacitating crash. So when we put that in perspective here in Ann Arbor, it's important to kind of think, well, how many roads does this apply to? How many of our streets have higher speed limits, and what's the experience on them? So for example, within the city of Ann Arbor, 55% of all crashes where a person was killed or seriously injured were on streets with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or greater. So whereas only 15% of all of our total street miles are made up of such roads. So again, this speaks to this idea of, you know, those streets which are faster speeds represent kind of a more dicey environment, especially for bicyclists and pedestrians who are traversing along those corridors alongside motorists. In a similar way, and the two are probably somewhat related, that the number of lanes also has a similar type of effect. 40% of all crashes where a person was killed or seriously injured occurred on streets with 4 or more lanes. Now, granted, those lanes also tend to have higher posted speed limits, so you can kind of understand the correlation between these two figures. But, you know, there's also a similar kind of inverse relationship that while those roads are experiencing the most number of crashes, especially serious crashes, they represent a very small fraction of our overall street miles. So 40% of crashes on roads with 4 or more lanes, but only 7% of our street network have such a characteristic. And the other thing to note too, and this will speak to our strategies in just a minute, is what are the things that are really causing those crashes? So 70% of all crashes that resulted in a fatality involved one or more of the following dangerous behaviors: failure to yield, driving, disregarded traffic signs and signals, and/or reckless, careless driving. And some of the things to note here is some of this can be addressed through engineering, but not all of it. When we think about impaired driving and reckless, careless driving, such as distracted driving, there are certain things that can be done through education. There are certain things that can be done through encouragement. We'll get to the 6 E's in just a second, but it really talks to the importance of doing a holistic strategy to try to drive down these crashes and achieve Vision Zero. Another slide I wanted to include, which is from the Mobility Factbook, is this idea of a crash rate. Crash rates can be tricky sometimes because you need to come up with a denominator, right? So everything I showed you just now was related to total crashes. What we didn't do was we didn't put that into any context, right? It was just a flat number. The number goes up, the number goes down. But in order to call it a crash rate, we need to add a denominator to it. So in this case, the consultant that's working on our transportation plan looked at population. And so when you say how many crashes happened in the 10 largest municipalities with population of 100,000, or no, I'm sorry, per 100,000 people, you get a perspective where Ann Arbor falls within the state. So we're at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of safety related to bicycles and pedestrian and fatal crashes. The other thing, though, that I would note, now I haven't done this analysis, so don't quote me on it, even though this is being filmed. But if you remember, one of the first slides I showed you is that we have, or actually a couple slides in, we have a very high mode split. Again, mode split speaking to how many people walk and bike within our community. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and suspect that our mode split is higher than sibling heights. So while we only are accounting for population in this slide, I would suggest that when you factor in how many people are actually walking and biking and or using transit in our community, our crash rate would actually probably go even lower than what you see here. So now what I'd strategy to kind of really talk about why bicycling crashes that I just reviewed is important and how we can go about addressing them in kind of a strategic fashion. So the first is the 6E framework. And if I start breaking up, someone please let me know. I just got a little pop-up that said my internet connection is unstable. So when we talk about the 6E framework, this is something that has been used widely by the League of American Bicyclists and the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. It includes engineering, it includes enforcement, it includes education, encouragement, evaluation, and equity. I will note that there is some discussion around the enforcement E and what that may look like in this framework, but I think those discussions are ongoing nationally. And I will say a lot of the work that we do, we really try to focus on this. Now, there are some areas where there's always room for improvement. I'm not going to sugarcoat that either. Something that we could probably stand to do a lot better job on is the education and encouragement piece. We kind of do this through fits and starts where we have a A2P Safe campaign a couple of years ago, but we haven't really revived that. And that is actually something I hope to bring to you in the next budget is ways to augment some of those other E's. We've spent a lot of attention and focus on the engineering E, but we can also kind of look to some of the other ways that we can bring down our fatal and incapacitating crashes. The next bullet point I want to bring up is know your assets. And, again, I want to thank Council. One of the things that we did at Council's request last year was to really take stock of what our built environment looks like and really understand where there are deficiencies in the system. So you may recall that you had instructed staff to develop a crosswalks against those. And that was a great exercise. It was a fairly heavy lift and fairly data intensive, but now we know exactly where our deficiencies are. And so it's good to really understand where we were, where we are, and where we're going, and really understanding what the built environment is today helps us appreciate what work lies ahead of us. Next, there's data-driven decision-making. So, what highlights the first couple slides that I mentioned related to the crash report, we are developing that crash report annually. It's something that we think is really important for us to really understand what the trends are, where the focal areas are. One thing that I didn't show you, but will be included in that report, is a hotspot analysis, like a density map. So it's kind of these areas where we have concentrations of crashes. And that's a quick little visual thing that we can look at to say, oh, this is bright red on the map. What's going on here? What are the causes of those crashes? What sort of investments do we need to make to improve that intersection or improve that road segment? The other thing I'll underscore under data-driven decision-making is something I started off earlier with, which is the next transportation plan is very much rooted in data. And as that draft is circulated publicly here in the very near future, hopefully you'll appreciate some of the data that went into some of the suggestions that came out of that plan. Guidelines are another important thing for us. And again, I think this has been important to council as well, to make sure that we strive for consistency, transparency, and predictability, while at the same time allowing for flexibility and adaptability, right? Because it's sometimes hard to predict exactly what's needed at any given location. So here we have kind of these guidelines that we work off of related to crosswalk design guidelines and other standards. We rely heavily on National Association of City Transportation Officials, which is NACTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, which is AASHTO. All the national guidelines, all of our engineers are up to speed on and regularly refer to make sure that our designs are consistent with best practices, national standards, as well as expectations for this community. Emulate best practices. We are in regular communication with other communities about what's going on, especially related to safety. I'm very fortunate to be part of a peer exchange with Transportation for America under their Smart Cities Collaborative. There are 3 key cities: Bellevue, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, that are all looking at transportation, especially amidst COVID, and what are different communities doing in those circumstances. But there are also about a dozen other communities, which include Grand Rapids, Gainesville, Florida, Boulder, Colorado, Washington, D.C. And we have regular Slack meetings where we go and we do information exchange related to specifics.
You're cutting out a little bit, Raymond, and so you might, if you can repeat yourself just a little bit here, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, John. So this information exchange, like I said, involves a whole myriad of different communities from across the country. We participate in weekly meetings with them, and that has really helped influence a lot of the work we've done around healthy streets, as well as other initiatives that we're currently pursuing. And then the last point I want to make is related to systems approach. It's really important that we try to see the forest from the trees. I know it's oftentimes logical and perhaps expected when a crash happens for us to react immediately to it, but we need to make sure we also kind of look at the big picture in terms of what is happening at a systems level. We want to make sure that the change we make is holistic. And if there's a crash that was, all crashes are preventable. If there's a crash that happened that may be a result of not necessarily an engineering solution, well, then we shouldn't apply an engineering solution to that problem. And so this is really just trying to make sure we're putting the square pegs in the square holes and the round pegs in the round holes. So now, if I may, I'd like to take a few moments to kind of address some of the specific initiatives related to pedestrians, bicyclists, healthy streets, and others. So the first is the inventory and target design. Again, I mentioned this earlier, that council had really wanted us to put together a holistic review of what our built environment looks like related to pedestrians. We did that. We regularly to kind of go in, keep up to date. We put it into our geographic information systems, our GIS mapping tools. So that way it's a tool that is accessible to multiple departments and can be used to inform different projects and how we move them forward. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons has been a really positive experience for the city. I think some of you have seen some of the past studies in terms of their effectiveness, but they can be a relatively low cost infrastructure improvement related to engineering. Many of them are solar powered, like the one you see in the picture before you, so they don't require hard wiring. They require some preventive maintenance, but we have seen that the yielding rates and stopping rates from vehicles for pedestrians when the rectangular rapid flashing beacon is actuated are quite high. And so that's why it's been one of our kind of preferred designs. We have about almost 40 of these in the community now, and we're continuing to put in more, especially at areas where we see either high volumes of pedestrians and or concerns with the pedestrian and vehicle conflict. School zones are another area that we've targeted pretty extensively over the years. Before I came to the city, there was kind of a 4-tiered approach to how we're going to make improvements around schools to enable children to bike and walk to schools. The other thing that maybe some of you have seen is we have upgraded the signage within the school zones that now include blank out traffic speed limit signs. What that means is these are LED signs where the speed limit will actually change when a school zone is active. So Pioneer High School is right down the street from where I live. That section of stadium is posted at 35 miles per hour, but when school gets back in session, I know it's not in person now, but when it gets back in session, that sign will change from 35 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour. This is something we coordinated with the police department on and our signs and signals crew. This is viewed pretty favorably because it helps with really educating motorists that, yes, it's not just a yellow flashing ball that people might ignore. It's actually a new posted speed limit when you enter that school zone. Those have also been accompanied with radar feedback signs. The radar feedback signs have been deployed at various locations throughout the city, such as 7th Street and some other areas. We felt like putting them around schools was an important consideration to really, again, draw attention to the fact that children might be crossing the street and that motorists should be careful when passing through those school zones. Countdown pedestrian signals. At the end of the last fiscal year, we bought a pretty hefty sum of countdown pedestrian signals. These are the ones, I'm sure you've seen them, instead of just kind of the red flashing hand, it actually has the countdown timer. This is an important safety improvement because it helps prevent what we call late arrivals. Late arrivals, when a pedestrian sees that flashing hand, they still think they can make it across because they don't know when that flashing hand turns solid. But with the countdown timer, you know exactly how much time you have. Do I have 10 seconds or do I have 1 second? And that will prevent or at least curb the possibility of pedestrians entering into the roadway when they can't actually make it across. So you're going to see a lot of those go up. I think we have nearly 100 of those that we purchased. Leading pedestrian intervals, I think I've reported to this to council in the past, but I did want to bring it up again. We have implemented leading pedestrian intervals now citywide. Leading pedestrian intervals, what they do is they hold the red light for automobiles in all directions for about 3 seconds before the green light goes for one direction. The pedestrian gets a 3-second head start. And this is important because it gets the pedestrian in a more prominent place that's visible to the motorist. This is a proven safety countermeasure at the federal level. And it is something we initiated at the onset of COVID because we thought it could really help with getting pedestrians across the street and increasing their safety. And we're pleased to have done it citywide on city-owned traffic signals and roadways. So there are roads that are outside of our jurisdiction that you might not see these, but all other city intersections have them. And then lastly, streetlights. I initially had a separate slide related to streetlights, but it was very similar to information you were provided about 2 months ago. So I didn't want to rehash information you had already seen. Just to give you an idea of where we're at to date, we have 32 new streetlight installations already this calendar year, and 964 repairs that were done by DTE. this calendar year. So that's just from January till now. It is something that we regularly coordinate with DTE on when there are streetlight outages. And we have regular team meetings every 2 weeks related to where new streetlights are going. We check that against the budget. We have a prioritization scheme based on where the highest and greatest need is, just so we can kind of prioritize our work. All right, next I'll speak to bicycling initiatives. One of the things that you may have heard either through DDA presentations or from myself or others is there's a movement across the country to really provide higher comfort bicycle facilities. The idea here is that many citizens are interested but concerned cyclists, meaning they might bicycle, but they don't feel safe biking in a shared use lane with vehicles. So things like sharrows, for example, aren't for everybody. Similarly, bike lanes oftentimes aren't comfortable for many cyclists or would-be cyclists because just that thin white stripe on the road with no added protection or buffer between the bicyclist and the motor vehicle doesn't give people a warm and fuzzy feeling. And so the idea of providing kind of high comfort facilities such as protected and buffered bike lanes really speaks to trying to open up the bike facility to everybody who's interested, no matter their ability, no matter their age, no matter their confidence in cycling. What are the sort of facilities that anybody would feel comfortable on? I myself, for example, I consider myself a fairly confident cyclist. I can bike in mixed flow traffic, but I wouldn't take my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, out on such a road, right? So with the sort of facility I'm looking for my 8-year-old daughter would be a protected bike lane, maybe a buffered bike lane, depending upon the characteristic of the roadway next to it. The other thing that we did a lot of work on last year, you may have seen, is green pavement or green pigmentation. What this really does is it highlights possible conflict areas for where motor vehicles and cyclists will kind of cross over one another. And so the idea is to really draw attention for the motorist about the possible presence of bicyclists. This is a relatively low-cost treatment that hopefully, will yield benefits related to safety. So if you think about, Ann Arbor Saline, for example, as you're heading south out of town, as you get to the interchange, there's a series of green pavement markings where, again, it's not the most comfortable place to ride, but motorists who are traversing that area know to pay special attention to the possible presence of cyclists in that area. One thing that I don't know if you're all aware of it, but every year we do a non-motorized progress report and we do bicycle pedestrian counts on an annual basis. This really takes stock of what has been done to date, the condition of the facilities, and it also provides kind of some baseline count data that we have for bicyclists and pedestrians. Now, one thing I'll note is our ability to count bicyclists and pedestrians citywide is limited because, quite frankly, the technology is not entirely reliable unless you use video capture. And so we tend to do manual counts or possibly tube counts for bicyclists. But we try to establish similar locations on a year-over-year basis. So at least that way we have a baseline to compare against and we can see what the overall trends are in terms of whether trends are increasing or decreasing or staying flat in terms of demand and usage. Some of the progress we've made over the last 10 years, 10 plus years, where we had a fairly paltry system back in 2007 with about 92 miles of bicycle facilities. And now we're up to nearly 170 miles. And again, that number is outdated. That's 2018. So that wouldn't even include the William Street bike facility and some other facilities that have been installed in the last year or two. And then lastly, I want to highlight kind of the need for partnerships. And one of the partnerships that we're always happy to be a part of is with the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, or SEMCOG, and kind of their sibling metropolitan planning organization, the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, or WATS. SEMCOG in particular has given a lot of promotional materials and safety materials over the years that we've been very happy to display and give out here in Ann Arbor. And most notably, the one that I think is really important is the bike light giveaway. SEMCOG orders a whole slew of bike lights, and these are available at customer service. So if anybody ever wants a bike light, It's one of the most effective things you can do to improve your safety as a cyclist out there on the roadway is to be seen, make sure you have illumination on your bicycle, and these are free. So it is something that I would encourage everyone, if you do ride a bike, and especially if you ride a bike at night, that your bike is properly equipped with bike lights. And we're happy to partner with SEMCOG to offer that service for free. All right, next I want to highlight some kind of, I wasn't going to go into too much detail on Healthy Streets, but I'm happy to answer questions you might have at the end of the presentation related to Healthy Streets. Just wanted to talk to you about some of the things that we've done so far related to it. So the first is online engagement. We got pretty clear direction from council back in May about how, if we were to implement Healthy Streets, to make sure we listen to the community. And I'm happy to say that we've had ongoing public engagement through this entire process related to Healthy Streets. So the first thing that you see on the map there is, the graphic there is a map of the suggestions that we received in the community. And there were over 990, I'll just round up to 1,000. There were nearly 1,000 recommendations and suggestions that came in from the community for Healthy Streets. And this really helped inform several things. This was the major input that was used for the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. As a reminder, the Neighborhood Slow Streets is the projects that we do on local residential streets. These are the soft closures. There's actually a picture of one of the treatments right there. It's a type 3 barricade accompanied with some signage that says road closed to through traffic, Healthy Streets, and there's a bicycle pedestrian signage there as well. The idea here really is to slow down motorists, alert them to the possible presence of bicyclists and pedestrians in the roadway, and hopefully reduce down on the amount of cut-through traffic through some of those neighborhoods. We currently have 27 of those deployments on the local streets. And I just skipped ahead, so there's the Neighborhood Slow Streets. Okay, we have 27 of those throughout the community. I should note here that we have stopped doing any new Neighborhood Slow Streets. That's a function of two things. The first is, quite frankly, we're kind of running out of budget related to the Healthy Streets initiative. So we had to kind of make sure we weren't overextending ourselves in that regards. And then the second thing too is, with this last round of major street reconfigurations, we know that winter is kind of around the corner within 90 or so days. So in order to really kind of get the most bang for our buck, we wanted to make sure that these were out for a duration that made the most sense. So, 2 to 3 months is kind of the sweet spot that we thought. So we don't anticipate any new Neighborhood Slow Streets this calendar year. And if council wants us to reconsider for next calendar year, we would look for direction from council on whether those should be pursued again. On the major streets reconfigurations, I'm sure you've noticed, I know some of you have been getting some emails and communications from constituents that the major street reconfigurations have gone up over the last 2 weeks. The DDAs were implemented the first week of September. So as a reminder, the DDA deployments are focused on Division, Miller, Catherine, a small section of Main Street, a small section of North U and State, and a small section of Packard. So those went in that first week of September. And then last week, the kind of complementary cities implementation happened as well. So that was the Broadway Bridge, which carried the Division cycle track across the bridge. It included South Main Street from where the DDA project left off at Packard all the way down to Stadium. It included East Packard between Eisenhower and Platt. And then it included a couple smaller sections on Swift and Pontiac as well. And then just as a reminder, the initiative behind that was really to make sure that we filled kind of gaps in the bicycle pedestrian network. We are slated to come back before council with different reports. So the first report we're planning on giving you is in early October related to the deployment and the implementation. That will be followed probably later with the data that was collected and what we're witnessing. We have a data collection plan. There was data collected before the deployments were initiated. Then we'll do another round of data collection once these deployments kind of get settled, probably in the first or second week of October. We'll synthesize that, and that will be part of the report that we report back to council towards the end of the pilot period. All right, next I wanted to highlight traffic calming as well. At your next city council meeting, you will have a resolution, draft resolution for your consideration related to Fernwood Avenue. Fernwood Avenue did go through the traffic calming petition process. It was supported by the neighborhood. It went to the Transportation Commission and is now coming to City Council for your consideration for approval. It's a fairly, I will say it's a pretty big traffic calming program. It includes raised intersections. So traffic calming takes many different flavors. We have what we call horizontal devices, which are things that kind of drivers have to drive around, such as bump outs. And we have vertical devices, which are devices that drivers have to drive over, such as speed humps, raised intersections. The neighborhood heavily favored the vertical devices, and so you're going to see the resolution coming before you at your next city council meeting a week from today related to Fernwood. We've also started the Glenwood Drive traffic calming petition process. We are actually having our second meeting this Thursday, if memory serves me correctly, where we had the first meeting a couple weeks ago. We listened to the residents, got some feedback on what we call some starter ideas. Now we've gone back to the drawing board based on that feedback, and we will be presenting the community with that. And then ultimately that will lead to a polling process where the residents along that street get to vote up or down whether they like what was proposed. And there's 6 more additional ones in queue as well. I will note too, related to traffic calming, our performance target metric is to process 3 per year. I will say these are fairly labor-intensive initiatives by staff, both in terms of design as well as engagement. So as much as I'd like to do more per year, we seem to be averaging about 3, and that's kind of the target. We seem to be on target to accomplish this year as well. All right, the last couple slides, what I'd like to focus on is the transportation plan update. And I think this is an important way to wrap up the conversation because it does set kind of the strategic vision related to transportation for the next 10 to 20 years. As I mentioned before, this is the transportation element of the city's comprehensive plan or master plan. And it's really rooted in several different values. Chief among those is safety. And I'm just gonna read these off just so you can, I don't paraphrase and I don't mess anything up, but in the plan, it's gonna say that safety participates in creating an environment in which people feel confident and comfortable traveling. The next is mobility. Ann Arbor prioritizes moving people and goods efficiently, making it easier for people to choose sustainable modes of transportation. Next is accessibility for all, which means in Ann Arbor, people of all abilities, ages, and stages of life, income, races, cultures, and ethnicities have equitable access to the places where they live, work, and play. Next is healthy people and sustainable places. This means that Ann Arbor's transportation system supports a healthy population, sustainable environment, and robust economy while celebrating and enhancing a unique quality of place. And then lastly is regional connectivity. And this is that Ann Arbor works to expand travel options throughout the region and integrate its transportation system with wider regional networks. One of the things that I'm really proud about related to this plan is the amount of public engagement that has been pursued. We've had, again, a series of public engagements, both online, in person, workshops, walkshops, all kinds of different things that we tried to do to really gather as much input as possible. Depending upon how you count, how much we've heard and how many people we reached out to, I quickly tallied some of the results of the public engagement, and we're up to about 4,000 touch points related to engagement on this plan alone to date. And that's before we even have the final plan, before we vet that out. So we're very proud of the amount of effort that's gone into the engagement and really listening to the community about what they want. The next thing I want to highlight is just where we are in plan development. So there are 3 phases of the plan. I know these are kind of a little squishy feeling, but there's the discovery phase, the ideation phase, and the action plan phase. For the discovery phase, what we really were trying to do was learn about opportunities, challenges around transportation in Ann Arbor, using a variety of community engagement tactics and innovative data analysis. And this helped identify the mobility values that I just reviewed. Next is the ideation phase. This is where we developed ideas for projects, policies, and programs to achieve the plan's goals in collaboration with stakeholders in the community. I should note that in addition to the public engagement I already highlighted, we do have 2 steering committees for this effort. There is a technical advisory committee and a community advisory committee, and that's another probably 50+ people that are helping inform the direction of the plan. And then the last phase of the project, which is where we currently into a set of key strategies and prioritizing actions into short, medium, and long-term horizons with stakeholders and community groups. We'll develop some high-level, like planning-level cost estimates and assess the benefits of the recommendations and identify pathways for implementation. We did get a first draft of the plan from the consultants last week. Well, actually, it was maybe a couple weeks ago. Staff provided comments on that first draft. And so the consultant right now is working on kind of public final draft, not final draft, but the draft of the report in the coming weeks to the coming months. So hopefully soon you'll start seeing that. We would love it if you could help promote that through your different networks, because we really want to make sure that this plan captures the community's interest and intent. So my last slide is a slide that I pilfered from the Vision Zero network, and it pretty much underscores what Vision Zero is. And I'll just read it off just so we're all on the same page. Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries among all road users and to ensure safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. I actually believe Vision Zero is within reach. If you recall where I started off the presentation, we're talking about 25 fatal and incapacitating crashes every year. We have a target of achieving Vision Zero by 2025. And so while we have started to see a slight downward trend in some of our crash statistics, we actually need to speed that up a little bit in terms of making sure we see more improvements in terms of those numbers. But 27 to 25 feels achievable to me. It's not going to be easy. A lot of the hard stuff lays ahead of us in terms of what needs to be done. I talked about speed, for example, as a key component. If we're really going to try to drive down those fatal and incapacitating crashes, we need to really figure out ways we can kind of manage speed within the system for motorists in particular, so that when crashes do happen, and one of the tenets of Vision Zero is an acknowledgement that crashes will happen. It's just human nature. So acknowledging that they will happen, what can we do to make sure that they don't result in a serious crash? So I hope, at least from my perspective, that I think we can get to Vision Zero. And I'm confident we're headed in the right direction. I know a lot more needs to be done. I am by no means celebrating our victory that we've accomplished everything we've set out to do. There's still a lot of work to do, but it does feel like it's within our grasp. And I hope you concur with that and have confidence in that as well. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Excellent, and thank you. Let's roll with questions until 8, and then we'll turn it over to the indomitable Dr. Stoltz. Councilmember Griswold.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. It's a wealth of information in one place. I want to acknowledge some of the other people and processes that are also, I believe, working towards getting us to zero fatalities and serious crashes. The A2 safety group has been active since late 2016, and you may have noticed in the traffic calming slide, someone was wearing one of the yellow A2 safety shirts. Also, I want to acknowledge Eli Cooper, who has been at this and I believe is working with Sam Schwartz on the transportation plan. I want to acknowledge MDOT. Staff there are working on improving the crosswalk on Huron near Thayer. Sam Schwartz, we have a supplemental contract looking at our crosswalk ordinance, our crosswalk guidelines. So I feel like we're all moving in the same direction, and it's more people than I can even name are working on this. So thank you.
Councilmember Nelson.
I have questions about the slide, well, a couple of slides actually. Crash report, pedestrian crashes, and then the crash report, bicycles. There was a spike in 2014 among the fatalities, and I guess I was just curious if there was anything in particular that happened in 2014 that's memorable. I mean, I know that there was an accident that took out like 6 cyclists. I don't know if that was in the city. I can't remember, but is there an explanation for why there's that spike in 2014?
Member Nelson, my apologies. I don't have the specifics related to what happened back in 2014. That predates my time here. But we can look into that. That crash data is available to us, so we can provide a supplemental kind of quick sketch of what happened. But we'd be happy to provide that to you if you'd like.
So then my other question is the slide that was the bicycling initiatives or bicycling improvements, I guess, the growth in infrastructure between 2007 and 2018. And I feel like I've asked this question of somebody else on staff, but I want to ask you too, if I haven't already. I'm just curious if we have particular policies around preference or lack of preference for shared use paths. And I appreciate that they are only treatments that make sense in sort of special circumstances, but I'm noticing that like there's a huge growth in bike lanes and relative to that, somewhat small growth in the shared use paths. I was just curious if you had any remarks about that.
Yeah, I think shared use paths are oftentimes considered one of those higher comfort facilities, right? Because you are separated from traffic. So, a shared use path is something I would feel comfortable biking with my daughter on. I think there are a couple of things to note though. The first is sometimes the right-of-way precludes us from doing shared use path. Either we don't have enough right-of-way, or there might be environmental constraints such as trees or other things that might make, because a shared use path, if you're going to do it right, it should be wide enough to be able to accommodate cyclists and pedestrians, upwards of 14 feet or more by contemporary standards. I know we have some shared use paths that are probably as narrow as 8 feet, but that doesn't meet current design standards in terms of how wide they should be. So you can kind of appreciate that, there's some areas where we might have that 14 feet, but there are other places where we might not. The other thing to note is a lot of our bicycle infrastructure as of late has been somewhat opportunistic. And that is to say that whenever there is a road that is up for resurface, one of the first questions we ask is there a non-motorized facility identified in the non-motorized plane? Is there a bike lane identified? Because since you're touching the road, since you're gonna, rip it up, tear it up, repave it, can we restripe the road in such a way that we can install a bike lane? And so that's why a lot of the facilities you've seen, whether it's Pauline, whether it's Maple, whether it's, pretty much any of our, even some of the, what you saw in Traverwood that we brought before City Council last year, all of those weren't necessarily the bicycle infrastructure driving that project. It was the pavement resurfacing that was driving that project. And we just kind of took the opportunity to say, oh, well, while we're at it, can we squeeze in a bicycle facility? And if we can, we do. And so that's why probably you've seen a lot more on-road facilities than off-road. If we do an off-road facility, it tends to be kind of a different project. Nick can probably speak to this better than I can, but I know we recently had a project in the last year to resurface some of our multi-use paths. So I think like Oak Brook was done. I think last year Ann Arbor Lane was done. But that's kind of a project unto itself. It's not necessarily related to the road project. And so that's kind of how we've prioritized that work. The other thing to note, and I think many of you are familiar with this, the city is launching into its capital improvement program. We just went through kind of a rework of the prioritization process, but the opportunity for looking at active modes of transportation, bicycling, walking, those opportunities will manifest through that CIP process. And so there might be more opportunities for standalone bike ped infrastructure, whether that's multi-use trails or something different.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I also appreciate you bringing up Oak Brook, because Oak Brook is an example of, it's the only shared use path that I got worked up and interested in improving because of its proximity to Brookhaven and the conditions there. And it's kind of a long story, but I ended up having a conversation with some staff about that. And there was, before I had lobbied to have that shared use path improved, the plan had been to put bike lanes there and convert it to a sidewalk. So I have one question. So when you put in a bike lane, if you're just going to stripe a road to put it down a bike lane, what's the average width of a bike lane?
It should probably be about 5 feet wide. We have bike lanes that probably aren't exactly 5 feet wide. We have some that include a buffer. We have some bike lanes that are upwards of maybe 6 feet wide. There's kind of a sweet spot for bike lanes where if you make them too wide, then cars end up driving in them. If you make them too narrow, they're not comfortable to bike in. So there's kind of this 4 feet to 6 feet sort of range that's kind of ideal, with 5 feet being kind of the target related to bike lanes. But then if you add buffers to that, whether that's just paint buffers or even a vertical protection element like what you see on William, that's where you start widening those facilities out for those high comfort type bike facilities that I mentioned earlier.
But we don't have very many bike lanes that have these huge buffers. That's unusual, right?
Correct, but we are moving in that direction. So we try to put in as many buffered bike lanes as possible when and where we can, where we have the right of way. There are some applications that I know some cyclists haven't been super excited about, like 7th Street, for example, put in a very kind of small buffer because that's all the pavement we had. It's like a 1 foot buffer with like a 4 foot bike lane or 5 foot bike lane. But then you have like Pauline, for example, has a little bit wider buffer when that street was redone. You have a buffer on Maple. You have, so it really just kind of depends on how much pavement we have to work with. One of the things that we typically have been doing is narrowing the vehicular travel lanes. Again, this has a bit of a traffic calming effect. So instead of a 14-foot lane, which is a thing, right? And a car is only about 7 feet wide, you could reduce that lane width down to 11 feet, sometimes even 10 feet, depending upon what type of roadway it is. And that frees up that space for things like bike lanes or buffers for the bike lanes.
All right, I have a follow-up question, because this is something I am very interested in understanding, how the standard for a multimodal path is now ideally 14 feet. Because based on the numbers you just told me, you're telling me that when I'm riding my bicycle alongside car traffic, the bike lane that you create for me is 4 to 6 feet. And there's a disincentive for you to put me on a safer path off the street, because the standard is to make that 14 feet. Well, if you have a 14-foot wide path, and you think a bicycle only takes up 4 to 6 feet, then you're imagining that pedestrians get 8 to 10 feet. So I don't even understand the math of it being 14 feet, but I do understand that if your standard for a multimodal path is 14 feet, you have room to put them almost nowhere. Where does 14 feet come from?
Okay, so the standard, and I kind of used the numbers somewhat without a lot of detail. The 14 feet really comes from a minimum of 10 feet of pavement with 2 feet of buffer on either side. So that's where you get 14. Keep in mind that multi-use paths are most often bi-directional. So the idea of having at least a 10-foot paved area allows for cyclists who are going opposite one another to pass each other safely, or if a cyclist is overtaking another cyclist or a pedestrian, there's room to maneuver around the person. Whereas bike lanes, with the exception of what we call cycle tracks, which is what you see on William, tend to be monodirectional, right? They go just in one direction. So if you were to take that 5 feet, or if you were to take that multi-use path and cut it in half, that's where you end up with the 5 feet for, you know, each direction of travel, which is the same width that you would have and try to allocate for a bike lane. Did that explanation make sense?
It sort of does, but like I said, I just cannot, I cannot fathom why the number would be so high that your preference would be to put me next to moving cars. That's what I don't understand. Like it strikes me that like the number, I mean, there's a logic to it, but I don't know how many paths in the city are 14 feet wide. I mean, our systems presumably were built before somebody got the idea they needed to be 14 feet wide. Like how many, do we have any paths in the city that are 14 feet wide?
I suspect so. I was going to say the border to border trail is probably 10 feet wide with the 2 feet.
So
buffers.
what I know of the conversation that I had around Oak Brook, the idea that be converted to a sidewalk and put bike lanes on Oak Brook. Now Oak Brook's not a high traffic kind of street, so that maybe that's not concerning at all. But my fear is that if the idea we have in our head is that the only way to have an ideal multimodal path is that it be 14 feet wide, virtually every path in the city is eventually going to be eliminated so that bicycles are going to all be put on the street in bike lanes. And I just, from my own personal perspective, and I have talked to a number of people who share my views that, like, you know, given a choice, I would much rather be off of the road. So I guess, so this is my question, I guess. Are we moving forward with, like, if you have a multimodal path and on a stretch where the road's getting repaved and the path's crumbling, do we look at that and say, well, we aren't going to be able to make that 14 feet wide, so we're just going to like do away with it. It's already in poor repair, and put the bikes on the street over here?
Yeah, so maybe I'll let Nick answer some of that, but let me start with a thought. I don't think we necessarily have a preference for or against multi-use paths. The one thing I will note is if you look at some of the national design standards from especially the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, or AASHTO, multi-use paths are best suited when there are not a lot of drive cuts or driveways, right? So
I get that. I understand. I'm talking about the paths that exist. And like there are legitimately quite a lot of multimodal paths around the city that are in poor repair. And I'm asking, like, when we're making decisions about whether to repair those paths or put bikes in the road, how are we looking at it? I'm terrified to hear that the standard is 14 feet because do you understand what I'm getting at?
Sure. And Nick, maybe I'll ask for a lifeline here, but in terms of the the process for resurfacing paths and some of the decision making that goes into that, yeah, let me turn it over to you for that part.
When we're looking to resurface some of the asphalt paths that are out there, it really depends on the situation that's out there. I mean, we're not looking to eliminate those and put people on the street automatically. We're looking at each one in the context of what's there. In general, what we've been doing with more of our resurfacing of those paths recently is we've just been focusing on resurfacing the paths. I'm not aware of a situation where we have thus far looked to eliminate one.
All right.
For example, we looked at various options. We resurfaced the path. We may still someday add bike lanes to the street. Some people feel more comfortable biking in the bike lanes rather than on the path as well. But we're not looking at eliminating them. In some cases, if we have the space in the public right of way, we may look to widen what's out there. The paths that are out there that you may call shared use paths vary anywhere from 6 feet wide to 10 feet wide to 12 feet wide. So in some cases, when we're resurfacing them, it's really nothing more than what's a sidewalk out there right now. In some cases, maybe a slightly wide sidewalk. But we're not making a universal decision to eliminate those paths and and in favor of only bike lanes in the street.
I appreciate that. Thanks. I'll let others ask questions.
Actually, let us, since we do have another hefty presentation, let me suggest that council members with questions remaining turn to send their particular questions to Mr. Hess and Hupy and so forth, because we need to move on. My apologies. We have a lot today. Ms. Stoltz. Mr. Hess, thank you very much. Did I say Ms. Stoltz? Of course I meant Dr. Stoltz. I know how much you insist upon that.
Yes, it's necessary. No, I'm
Totally.
just kidding. It's great to see you all. Thank you all for inviting us into your homes tonight to share a little bit of an update on what's happening with A20. Appreciate the conversation and apologies in advance. We're about to have a deluge of information coming your way. So I do apologize for that, but we've been very, very busy. Joining me tonight is Thea Yeager-Lerner, who's going to give you an update on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And I also have on the line Zach Wass-Smith and Galen Hardy from the office. So I just want to acknowledge they're here. So with that, bear with me for 1 second while I share my screen here. We'll go through the presentation. Confirming you can all see those slides. All right, let's go. Great. Well, again, thank you all for your interest in this topic, your continued support of this work. We have a lot to cover today. So I'm going to do, mostly for members of the public who may be listening, a very, very quick refresher on A20, acknowledging not everyone lives and breathes it in the way that we are here in sustainability. Then we do have, you're the first to see it, the updated greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 2019. So Thea's going to walk us through those numbers. You can get a sense of our trajectory. And we want to give you a sense of what we've been working on since the passage of A20, which was June 1st, 2020. We're going to tee up what's coming down the pipeline, what we're doing right now. And then we have some ideas of ways that we could collaborate to really move some of the initiatives forward. And then, of course, any questions, ideas that you want to add to the discussion, please feel free to do so. Before I jump in, I do want to acknowledge, though, of course, we're sitting in this moment. We all feel this intimately and intensely with COVID-19. The Office of Sustainability and Innovations is like every other unit in the city. We have really tried to pivot hard to ground a lot of our work in the realities of COVID. So I just wanted to share that a not insignificant amount of my time, especially early during the pandemic, was in the Emergency Operations Center with colleagues on the line, that our office played a leading role in the dependent care coordination work. So we helped our frontline workers get care, whether that's for an ailing adult in their life or a youth that they care for or someone who has special needs. And so that was in fact what I took on in the Emergency Operations Center. We've joined the extraordinary John Fournier on the Work from Home Committee and really thinking about how this moment presents an opportunity for us to perhaps pivot some of our business to a virtual setting, which has the opportunity to actually lower emissions and kind of aligns with some of our goals. And then we also played a role in setting up some of the internal materials you may have seen, I hope you've seen, for caregivers to really help them navigate this pretty tricky situation we're in. As Raymond mentioned, I too have a young child, and as we transition back to school, well, what does that look like and how do you actually do that? So we've played a role in that space, which isn't something we actually talk about a lot. So I just wanted you to know too that while I'm going to talk a lot about A20 and be really excited about it, I'm also really excited about the things that we're doing that are just fundamental kind of care things within the city, caring for the organization and the people that help make the city function day to day. So I just wanted to start with that. So very, very quick refresher, mostly for members of the public. A20 is here. Council unanimously adopted on June 1st is what we say, but you all know it was very early on June 2nd when it was formally adopted. And the vision guiding us is that together our entire community is going to implement a just transition carbon neutrality by the year 2030. We've got the plan, which centers around 7 core strategies I'll highlight in a second, and 44 actions. The strategies, again, the first 3 are about energy, with the first one being about powering our electrical grid, all the lights and all the places that we sit, the way we heat and cool our homes with renewable energy. The second being about electrification. We call this beneficial electrification. So what can we transition over in a way that makes sense, is financially viable, the technology is available. Pairing that with the third, energy efficiency, to of course drive down demand to the fullest extent we can. The fourth is reducing the miles we travel in our community by 50%. We work with folks like Raymond on the Vision Zero strategy. We pushed hard to have sustainability be a core part of that work. And what we do know from the pandemic, good or bad, is that VMT is down, right? And so the positive frame, I would say, is we've demonstrated how much is virtual and how much is possible in the virtual realm, but of course not equally possible. Not all people can do work virtually. And that's a really important equity element, which gets to the seventh concept I'll talk about in a second. Of course, the fifth is changing our relationship with all the goods and materials that we have in our life, how we purchase, what we purchase, why we purchase, and what we do with it once we're done with it. The sixth focuses on resilience, of course, for our people, our ecosystems, our place. And then the seventh is cross-cutting. So equity lives in here, our grant programs live in here. The seventh strategy is things or activities that live everywhere. So they don't have their own strategy because they're kind of embedded in everything else. These really are the pillars of our work, as you know. And then there's these 44 actions, which are much more fluid, and they're sort of the infrastructure around those core strategies that we have. I'm not going to dive into this, but I am going to talk about a lot of these in our discussion today. So again, for members of the public, please check out the 820 plan, which in addition to the plan itself, we do have our governance model. I'll be talking a lot about some of the things coming that we're working on right now in that governance model. We've got the prioritization framework, which discusses how we evaluate actions. Actions will change. So how will we make sure that they're considered thoroughly, purposefully, and intentionally as we move forward? And then we have a draft investment scenario that guides us. So that's just a quick refresher. We're going to go into depth here in a second. But before we do, Thea, I'd like to turn it over to you to walk us through our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory.
Thank you, Missy. And my internet is especially tenuous tonight, so my video is off, but please let me know if you can't hear me. So we know that it's important to have a consistent data collection system to measure progress on the 820 plan that Missy just ran through. And the main way that we do that is through the community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So tonight, I'll just run through a brief overview of our inventory along with information on the most recent 2019 year. And so this will illustrate long-term trends in emissions, what we currently account for, and our planned improvements in the future. So next slide, please. So the inventory accounts for, at a minimum, the basic reporting categories required by the Carbon Disclosure Project, which we participate in on an annual basis. For the most part, we're not able to directly measure our community's largest greenhouse gas emission sources. And so the data presented here is based on aggregated, scaled, or modeled data. And just a reminder, in some cases, data might not be available on an annual basis. So we might not see changes from year to year, but see overall trends on the long term. And then just as with any analysis, it's important to keep in mind the data quality used and also consider additional metrics as needed. And so just as a quick refresher, if you're not familiar, the inventory is estimated with the ICLEI US Community Protocol, which recommends data sources and methodologies specific to the US. This is a pretty standard protocol that many cities follow, and so it allows our inventory to be compared to other cities, and it maintains consistency from year to year, so we can be sure we're looking at true trends. The inventory accounts for 3 greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Other greenhouse gases, like those used in refrigeration, might be estimated in later years. Next slide, please. So we can take a look at how Ann Arbor's community-wide greenhouse gas emissions have trended since 2000, which is our baseline year. So this graph compares the simple inventory. It includes emissions associated with residential, commercial, and university buildings, and also local transportation and our landfill waste. We see that we've reached a 20% reduction in emissions over the last 20 years. But we also know we should probably look at an average over 3 years just because of changes, variations in weather and other factors from year to year. So that's around a 16% reduction over the last 3 years. And we see the largest changes occurring in the commercial and university building sectors. Next slide, please. So this figure breaks out the changes in emissions by sector. Because of changes in building categories of the last 20 years as university buildings or between university buildings and commercial buildings. Those sectors have been combined in this graph. But we can see that buildings in general account for roughly 3/4 of emission reductions to date. Even in cases where consumption of energy itself has increased, overall emissions have decreased due to a cleaner grid. If you go to the next slide, we can see DT's fuel mix, which is where our community gets our electricity from. We can see why the grid that provides our community electricity determines so much of our emissions. If you want to click through on this a little bit, moving from 2000 to 2015 and following years, we see that the portion of electricity generated from coal has decreased, but it's still the primary source. We can see how big of an impact displacing coal has on our community emissions to date, but how much more work we need to do to achieve a renewable grid. And as we saw before, buildings account for 2/3 of our community's greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from electricity and natural gas. Next slide, please. Ann Arbor has grown and changed in the last 20 years. Comparing changes in population and GDP to emissions, we can see that emission reductions are not mutually exclusive with healthy growth. Next slide. So we just looked at a simple inventory to understand long-term trends. Standard protocols for estimating inventories have become more comprehensive and more data is easily accessible. Over the last few years, the inventory is able to include additional sources of emissions that provide a more complete picture. We call this the expanded inventory. So in addition to the sources analyzed in the simple inventory, it also looks at commuting patterns, local rail, and more city operations like the municipal airport and closed landfill, as well as upstream emissions associated with electricity and fossil fuels. While most of the changes are relatively small compared to the total community-wide emissions, commuting adds around 13% more emissions. It's important to keep in mind that these emissions occurred in previous years as well. We just don't have the data to estimate their magnitude. Next slide, please. So the blue line here shows the simple inventory trend we saw previously. And if you move forward a little bit, the orange line shows the increase in the expanded inventory, largely due to the ability to account for community behavior. And then just going forward once more, we can see that while emissions have decreased 20%, roughly 1% a year since 2000, we have a lot of work to do at a much more rapid pace to reach carbon neutrality by 2030. This slide illustrates what sectors and activities our community's emissions come from. We know buildings account for 2/3 of our emissions, with passenger vehicles accounting for over 1/4 of emissions. The remainder is attributed to commercial vehicles, waste, and upstream emissions. The left graph illustrates changes from year to year in emissions, with the top values representing the total emissions of each year. There are some fluctuations from year to year. That's largely due to the use of electricity and natural gas that's somewhat weather dependent. But in general, the change from year to year is relatively small. You want to go to the next slide. So this slide illustrates the emissions per capita or Ann Arbor resident. Again, we can also put the expanded emission trends in the context of population. We see that emissions per capita follow a similar trend to the grand total. And then next slide. And then this illustrates what sources generate the community's emissions and help understand the scope of each HE0 strategy. The use of electricity represents the most emissions here. This portion is expected to continue to decrease in the next few years as plan changes from DT and the university come online, but a mainly natural gas powered grid will still have significant associated emissions. HE0 targets securing 100% renewable energy for our community to eliminate emissions associated with electricity. We see that natural gas and fuels used in transportation will become the largest generators of emissions, highlighting the importance of transitioning to sources of energy whose emissions can be decreased. So this really helps illustrate how the strategies from HE0 are informed by our community's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And then next slide. So I went through the simple inventory, which allows evaluation of long-term progress compared to a 2000 baseline. And then we looked at the expanded inventory, which provides a more comprehensive picture of where we are now. In the future, we hope to share an expanded plus inventory, which will include consumption-based emission sources, like transportation activities, how and what food, goods, and services we consume, the embodied carbon in buildings and new construction, and renewable energy credits and offsets. We plan on developing this inventory as part of a cohort through ICLEI. Unfortunately, that was postponed due to the COVID pandemic, but we hope that in future years we can put that together. We do also have more detailed information on this that we hope to be shared with the public and with the Energy and Environmental Commissions at a later date. So with that, Missy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Thea. And just to put a really fine point on what Thea just said, we are working on a public report that we're going to post on the website, and we are going to the commissions with this update as well. So we'll have material for you to be able to point residents to get much more depth of what we just kind of rapidly went through in our time together. Thank you so much, Thea, for your leadership in helping us move forward and address some of the concerns that I know the community has about getting to a holistic inventory. So really appreciate you and the great work you're doing. Just to pivot our conversation now, I want to give you an update on some of the things that we've been working on since the passage of A20. This is going to be fairly whirlwind, so thanks again for your patience as we go through this. I've broken this into 3 different categories just to kind of help conceptualize it. So the first are things that we've been doing internally. These are things that most people aren't going to notice. Well, I hope a few of them they notice. But other things will help us be really, really effective as we sprint in the next phase of implementation. So we have borrowed profusely from our colleagues in IT and created a new project management process and platform. We've worked with IT to create it. So we have, this is an internal management system. It walks through all the really smart phases of project management, institutionalizes it, sets up templates so that team members in sustainability, as well as those working with us, have very, very clear understanding of what's expected. And I have a really easy way of understanding where we are in terms of implementation of the various activities you're going to hear about. I hope you've noticed we redesigned and relaunched the website. This was a really exciting thing. It's something that we've wanted to do for a long time. We've taken the A20 website and moved that content over to the city's website itself. So if you haven't yet, please do take a look at the website. Let us know what you think. If you're missing any information, you want to see more, please let us know. But we're really excited to see its functionality greatly increased. And you can see a screenshot of that over on the right. There's navigation for people to help them, depending on if they're a resident or a commercial enterprise, whether they're interested in a specific topic. So there's lots of journeys that we've created on the website. We've also developed our community engagement strategy around A20, which is an internal document, but it guides how we do engagement and where we emphasize our time. And we also have our renewable energy strategy that has been created over the summer, which lays out the specifics based on A20, but it kind of starts laying out the decision tree. We're moving in certain directions. You hopefully have seen the policy memo that was in the packet. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But those are different pieces of legislation that are identified in our energy strategy that we're watching because they directly influence where we're going and our ability to succeed. We've got a quarterly newsletter that we distribute. We continue to do quarterly reporting for council and for the public. We've added youth commissioners to the Energy and Environmental Commission. And we have launched a partnership with CTN where we have a YouTube channel where you can find things specific. It's a sustainability YouTube channel, so you can find out anything that we have recorded, and we can start documenting a lot of really rich content that's been created over the last several months. We also registered 7 city facilities for energy audits. 5 of those audits are in progress right now. By end of the year, we'll have completed energy audits that give us a really detailed understanding of where we have opportunities to reduce energy. And I'm really excited to announce this is all grant funded. So we didn't have to spend a single dollar of taxpayer revenue right now to do the audit. We will, of course, be coming back when we know about what improvements we want to make. But this is really exciting, and this is through a special partnership with the Ann Arbor City District. We've been working on a solar RFP. We've talked about this a lot, to do rooftop solar on select city facilities. That is getting really close to finally being released. We're doing something pretty different than what the city has ever done. And that's part of the reason this is taking a long time as we work through that procurement process. We've also established the Carbon Neutrality Coordinating Committee, which is in the governance document. These are representatives from the major institutions in the town to ensure that we're collaborating around carbon neutrality. So folks like the university, the county, us, the RIDE, and others, to make sure that as we're setting our own strategies, we are collaborating, and to the extent that we can, coordinating to get scale in terms of implementation success. We continue to partner with our colleagues at the Ann Arbor affordable housing, or the Housing Commission, on our net zero energy initiative. And in fact, we're hoping to work with them, well, we are working with them to do energy audits at their facilities so we can identify even more saving opportunities there. We're working, we are on the priority-based budgeting team, and of course, a lot of A20 is inherently embedded in the priority-based budgeting work. You'll be seeing that, I believe, in sometime later this year. I'm not sure if Administrator Crawford has yet set that agenda, but I know we're working internally on that initiative. And then I know previously Craig mentioned the CIP, Raymond mentioned this as well. All of the staff have been on CIP teams helping to embed A20 into our CIP decision-making process. We really fundamentally feel like, and I'm sure you do as well, that if we're going to be successful, this has to be institutionalized in decision-making. So it can't just be the 6 people in sustainability doing this work, it has to be everybody. And so we're finding the different mechanisms to really tie this into everyone's job description. And then we are working with IT on A20 metrics reporting. So we've gone through all of the 44 initiatives, identified the metrics, which are very transparently outlined in the A20 plan, but we are now working on automation of those metrics. So what do we need to do internally? What kind of data do we need to collect, including what Thea just presented on the greenhouse gas inventory, so that we can automatically and in real time be reporting to the public and to you about how we're doing in those various areas. So this is a heavy lift. It's a lot of machination in terms of how we get to that point, but it's something that's really important and we have been working on with our colleagues in IT who are phenomenal. So those were internal categories in terms of what we've done so far. Transitioning over to policy activities, wanted to let you know that we have testified. There is a bill before the state Senate to raise what's known as the distributed generation cap. The state has what we would argue is an arbitrary and capricious cap on the amount of renewable energy that a utility has to accept, and they have established that at 1%. And we think that makes no sense, as do many, many other players in the landscape. And this is problematic for us because we're about to hit that cap. Because we've had such growth in distributed generation, projections in our service territory are we're going to hit that cap this year. And that means the utilities may not have to accept any additional renewable energy that you want to put on your roof. They may not have to accept it. And so we want that cap to be completely removed. And if we can't get that, we at least want the cap to be raised. So we have time for this burgeoning and really productive industry to continue to grow and provide renewable, resilient forms of infrastructure and really good paying jobs in our area. This isn't on here, but I will tell you too, we're actually testifying tomorrow on a separate bill before the House, which is about providing PACE funding for residential enterprises. We're excited to see this legislation move. Zach Wass-Smith, who's on the line right now, will be testifying on behalf of our office in support of that legislation. That would allow individuals to unlock funding to be able to do deep energy efficiency improvements in their home, efforts to help weatherize their home, make it more resilient. And the cost, they would pay that back through their bills, but the cost would stay with that infrastructure as that home was sold, because those improvements stay with that infrastructure. And this is a really important strategy because upfront costs can be inhibitive for many people. And when you leave, or if you're thinking about leaving in the future, it's a barrier to making those investments. So allowing it to stay with that infrastructure is important. So that is not on the slide because that legislation popped last week and we're excited to support it. We also initiated a streetlight reliability, responsiveness, and sustainability strategy working with Raymond Hess and others in the transportation unit. We have drafted that and shared that with the city administrator. We're excited. This is from a council priority that you actually gave to us in, I believe, February of this year. With some frustration around the responsiveness of our utility around streetlights. So we walked through with a bunch of different stakeholders what our different pathways could be to address these issues. And we're excited that we have landed on one recommendation, and that's going to be coming to you really soon. I believe you'll see it in the coming weeks, and then we can talk about how to operationalize that. We have played a pretty significant role in the ICC, the International Code Council. We worked with a bunch of municipalities from around the US to make sure that energy efficiency was really elevated in the code development process, the International Code Council. And now we're working, and we were successful, actually quite successful in getting really big strides in the 2021 ICC code. Now what we're trying to do is work at the state level to understand how we adopt state codes and what opportunities there are for municipalities to interject and make their voices heard in that process. So we're working with the state. We're going to be doing a webinar, and I believe there are 135 per last count municipalities around the state that are interested in learning more about this process with us. So we're coordinating with entities at the state to organize a webinar to learn about this process and then figure out what our strategy is going to be to make sure Ann Arbor's voice is heard in that process as the state moves forward. We've also started our work on our local benchmarking requirements and disclosure requirements. Zach and Thea are leading that work on our team. We're going to have an ask at the end for stakeholders that you think would be interested in joining us on that journey to really figure out what makes sense for Ann Arbor's work in that space. And then we've developed a council policy memo on the 10 major pieces of legislation that we're actively monitoring or working for. That is in your council packet tonight. And then, of course, the last one is we know that the governor's working on a major climate commitment, and she was hoping to make that commitment around Earth Day. Of course, COVID struck and that wasn't the right time. But we are really excited to continue encouraging her and supporting her and making that commitment, because that commitment is just going to create a much easier path for us to success. And then the last category in terms of activities we've done, and again, thank you for your patience. I know I talk fast, but I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, is around external activities. So I hope you know that we have won a grant and we have actually completed it. You can see a picture on the right. This is Northside Community Center. We won a $50,000 grant, and I will give Josh McDonald on our team a lot of credit for this. We had a funder reach out to us, and I honestly thought it was a prank. They offered $25,000 because of A20 and the attention and the commitment that this council has made to climate action. They offered $25,000 to do a solar project. And I asked for 50, and they said yes if we put in batteries, and we said we will. So we made Northside our very first resilience center, and it is up, it is functioning. And on Friday we are going to have a little scaled back celebration. We're going to do a formal ribbon cutting ceremony at Northside at 3 p.m. More information will be coming out. This isn't a big community celebration because of COVID, but we are hoping to live stream it. So we'll be sharing more details as we're working with you on those. We've also awarded 10 Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grants. You can see some of the grantees here. The work ranges from a children's literacy program in our community to working with Peace Neighborhood Center on expanding their food distribution and their virtual schooling support for at-risk youth who are struggling right now in this moment. And we were at Peace Neighborhood Center actually on Friday. Galen, Zach, Fong Wu, our energy manager on the team, and myself, and we helped with the food distribution. We gave them their official check and celebrated with them, and are excited to keep partnering with them as we move forward. So you're going to see a lot more of opportunities for sustainability to kind of be in the community, helping meet existing community needs. During that event, we also handed out energy efficiency kits to folks that we developed in partnership with DTE, but we added additional enhancements too. I'm really, really excited about our Solarize program. I'm going to have a separate slide that goes through more specifics of that, but this is a wild success for us. And again, I'll pivot to that, I think, on the next slide. We also launched this summer an e-bike bulk buy program. Now, I'm just going to identify this. We tried to launch a traditional bike program. Actually, it's what made the most sense to us in partnership with the Healthy Streets initiatives. People are outside biking. They're outside walking right now more. And so we wanted to help people to access traditional bikes. And the truth is, you can't. If anyone's gone to a store, you know that stock and inventory is down because people are buying those bikes. And then there's a supply issue in terms of getting new bikes in stock. But what we did find is that our electric bike community had inventory and was excited to partner with us around A20 and getting people of all different abilities onto these bikes, if that's of interest to them. So just today, we did a press release. We brought in a new vendor into that program, and we are working on our third vendor who will actually hopefully be able to offer some traditional bikes. We'll be coming back to council once we get that all solidified. But this is pretty exciting. We also brought those e-bikes to the police department, and they did some test drives with those bikes, and that went swimmingly well. So we're hoping to actually see an e-bike in our own fleet as we move forward. Very, very exciting, our landfill solar study. You gave us permission to move forward with DTE on the 2 studies that we need to do to understand if this site is possible, if it's even possible to interject 23.55 megawatts, a lot of energy into DTE's grid. Great news, the first study came back and the answer is it is. Their grid with very minor upgrades can take that kind of infusion of energy, which is really, really rare. So that is wonderful. We have just pivoted to the second study. So we are doing all of the paperwork to launch that study, which will be a 60-day study, and that will be the final cost. So what would it actually cost us to make those improvements in that infrastructure? At that point, we'll be coming back to council with hard numbers to be able to talk about our next steps in that project. But the good news is it's technically possible. And that's what we needed to find out through that first study. We also won a small grant on bridging our work around electrification, energy efficiency, energy storage, equity, and renewable energy. So basically everything energy related in A20. We won this grant to pull together different stakeholders, including contractors who come into our homes and may or may not be knowledgeable about electrification, like heat pump appliances, or might not be up to date about the latest energy efficiency options. So we're going to convene them and understand, what do they need? Why don't they promote these kinds of appliances or transitions? We also are convening the manufacturers that produce these different types of appliances and equipment that we want to see in our homes and in our commercial enterprises, to understand what kind of incentives they can offer, what kind of discounts to help lower the upfront cost for these different initiatives. And we're also working with municipalities throughout the Great Lakes region who want to replicate this work. We're inviting funders to the discussion, and this will be in October. It'll be 4 meetings over a week, where we've got a core team of individuals who are helping us actually create this. So the small grant helps us think about what a program could look like. The final output is we're creating a program, and then we're going to take it to funders to help us finance a mass electrification initiative that combines all of these things and is economically viable. So this is a really important seed grant. It's not a lot of money. It was only $5,000, but in the world of virtual convenings, $5,000 actually can go fairly far when you don't have to pay for your platforms. We also have applied for grants for 2 dual port DCFC fast chargers, so electric vehicle fast chargers at City Hall. That means 4 charging stations that would go into City Hall, be a demonstration project, be open to the public, open to our police force, be able to rapidly charge electric vehicles. We have been notified that we've won funding from DTE. This is a 3-part funding initiative. DTE has money, the state has resources, and then the city would have to match, and it's roughly a third, a third, a third. So we've applied for the DTE portion. We've submitted initial application for the state portion and are waiting to find out, and then we'll bring the full package to council for consideration to see if we can actually do our first fast chargers. And then we are finalizing right now our EV readiness ordinance. It's with legal and planning, and I believe it's set for public hearing in October. You're going to have that before you actually be able to make a decision on if we're going to move forward with that requirement, which came out of 8.0 as well. Whew, not done yet, because let me tell you a little bit about Solarize, which is super exciting. So this is already outdated because I got an update from Julie on Friday and we've moved. So we have 7 group buys that are completed or in process, but that's not true because I think we're launching 2 more based on public interest that came last week. And I'm excited because those are with 2 new vendors that haven't been part of the program historically. So this is great. We've reached over 530 households in this initiative, which really started, for those who may not know, Julie Roth is our Solarize coordinator. Julie Roth, Councilmember Hayner, joined us at a discussion at her home in November where she was really interested in solar and wanted to share this. And she was sort of like the solar evangelist. And seeing her energy and enthusiasm, I reached out to her and asked if she'd like to see if she could help more households get solar and kind of share her love for this topic. And she has been on fire. So she's reached so many households. It's not 60 new arrays. We're almost at 100 new arrays based on work that's happened since we submitted this to the administrator 3 weeks ago. We're almost at 500 kilowatts. So that number is wrong, of new distributed solar. To give you a sense, in a good year before we ran this program, we were sub 100 kilowatts. Some years, I mean, that was a good year, getting close to 100. Most years, it was like 25, maybe 50 kilowatts. So this is a big deal in terms of the amount of scaling. And this is just what's committed or already installed. With those additional events running and people still in the queue, we are going to have significant growth. And my goal is by the time we come back, by the anniversary of the first year of A20, I want a megawatt installed in our community. And that's a big deal. That is a lot of renewable energy when you consider that the system on my house is 5 kilowatts. That's a lot of solar that people are putting on their homes. And it's not just that. Our business partners, our solar installers, are telling us they're hiring. So they've hired 2 new engineers. They've hired a new, one of our partners hired an entirely new installation team because demand was so high. They've almost all brought on interns to help them kind of learn the industry and try to get them into the industry. One has hired a salesperson and one has hired an electrician. So we're creating jobs. We're not just moving our electric grid and increasing resilience. We're helping people find really good paying employment in an industry that we're excited about. So this is just a program I'm really excited about. Julie also has been asked to be an instructor to lots of other local governments so we can share our story nationally, because this is pretty novel. I mentioned, wow, man, we have a lot. I mentioned that we did energy kit and food distribution at Peace on Friday. We hosted a neighborhood association meeting where we reached out to every registered neighborhood association in the city and invited them to come learn about A20 and share their ideas about how we could be partnering with them. Based on that conversation, we will be hosting quarterly meetings with all the neighborhood associations in the community. We have a curriculum for our A20 ambassadors program, and we aim to launch that in November. So you'll see more about that in a second. We continue to engage with our partners, the 70 organizations that have been instrumental in helping us get A20 developed, but now the pivot is to helping us actually implement it. So we've had, we hosted an event, we've actually hosted 2 events since we last spoke. We've done a survey to understand where they want and can help with implementation. And we've also done one-on-one outreach to each of them, really understand where we're moving and where that aligns with their goals and objectives. Water quality matters. When you next get it, you're going to see an announcement about A20 in that. So I want to thank our communications team for helping us with that. We officially launched the Aging in Place Efficiently program. This was a grant-funded program that today we had our second meeting from the official launch of that program. We'll be hiring 2 Aging in Place Efficiently coordinators through. That's our portion of the grant funding. They'll be either individuals with deep experience working with low-income seniors or individuals who are themselves low-income seniors. It's a few hours a week, but it's really to ground this program in the lived experience of people who will be helping. And that feels really, really important and authentic to the work that we're doing. And then we have reinitiated our coordination with Ford, Toyota, GM, and Tesla around electric vehicle bulk buys in the community. So we can pass kind of the savings similar to Solarize on to residents around electric vehicles. Whew. That's what we've been done since June 1st, just to be clear. So a lot is going on. Pivoting to what's coming, a little bit quicker, hopefully. Internally, we have, and in fact, this is outdated. We actually already did a meeting with the building department to explore their priorities, our priorities, and where there were opportunities for alignment. We have a similar meeting coming with the planning department and Give 365, who has been an exceptional partner for the work that we've been doing. And we're just really excited to scale and elevate that kind of partnership, especially around volunteerism, because we're having a lot of people raise their hands in the community to join us on our journey. We continue to move forward with the implementation of green fleets. I'm really excited about where this is going. We are in reaching out to the OEMs. We also reached out to ask if they would bring their EVs to us for testing, especially in the police department. So we're trying to bring in more and more of the technology to give those OEMs the real world experience that they need to demonstrate that their product is useful and works in our kind of climate region, but also to meet our objectives and our goals. And then I mentioned before, we started our work around metrics automation, and we have more work to do. So we continue, and I hope that you'll see progress starting to manifest itself externally on our website shortly. In terms of policy activities, that memo that I shared gives a lot of context to what we're working on. I have open on my computer right now DTE's voluntary green pricing filing with the Michigan Public Service Commission. We are understanding what that program looks like. This is a really important program for us for many reasons. One, this is how our residents right now are able to access renewable energy. It's also how we might be able to access renewable energy. So we're talking to DTE not only about this program, and we might intervene in this case around their filing, but we also want to create this to make it as just and equitable as possible so that it possibly can be an avenue to scale some of our community-wide energy work. We're going to continue to monitor the raising of that distributed generation cap that I led with, and then the other pertinent energy legislation. Those are, and the pace, those are the things that are before us right now. We are actively we're monitoring to understand when's community solar coming. Can we work with our legislators to get community solar legislation presented so we have more opportunities for folks in our community to access renewables and the benefits that come from them? Net metering, we want it back. We want a fair rate. There's work right now in the consumer's territory to do request a cost of solar study that more holistically evaluates and gives value to the value that solar puts on the grid, which I would argue it is not compensated appropriately in DT or consumer's territory. Grand Rapids has intervened in that case, and we are standing behind Grand Rapids and giving them support. We have no weight in that because we're not in consumer's territory. We're figuring out how best to navigate that, because a cost of solar study for the state is valuable for us too, even though it's in a consumer's case. The streetlight strategy will be coming to you shortly, and we're going to be working to implement that based on council guidance. We need to recruit stakeholders to join us on our benchmarking work and our energy disclosure work, and then continuing our work around building in electrical codes. So as I mentioned before, we need to understand how the state develops those codes and when key timing and interjection points are. Based on that, we'll then develop our strategy for how we make sure that the objectives of 820 are as fully integrated into those codes, or at least our voice is as fully integrated into the code development process. Externally, we're going to finish that final study on the landfill solar project. We'll hopefully have that by end of the year. We should, based on timing. We'll be coming back to council to talk about that and what our next steps are. We will continue to partner with folks, especially a lot of our 820 partners want to help us with building code advancements because it's so significant in terms of helping the entire state make really significant progress. Our electrification, efficiency, equity, renewable energy convening will happen next month. We will then have a draft strategy based out of that we'll start shopping around for additional support, funding support to try to implement. You'll have the EV readiness ordinance to you in the next several weeks. And then we're finalizing our EV readiness strategy. So that's not just the ordinance, it's everything. Where do we want our charging infrastructure to be? Why do we want it there? How are we going to push for legislation, and what legislation do we need to be supportive? What role does the EV bulk buy play in that initiative? So we are working on level 2 chargers right now with the DDA. I have an audacious goal, and I'll say it out loud because you might as well say it out loud. I want 100 level 2 chargers in place by next year in our community, additional level 2 chargers. Those are traditional, not fast chargers, but I want people to see them, and I want them to feel safe and comfortable knowing that they're going to find charging infrastructure in our community. And there's grant funding to support that, and I don't like leaving money on the table. So I want us to run at that and try to unlock those resources to the fullest extent. We also have material, I could show you my office, it is very messy. We have the material in the office to do more energy kits, energy efficiency kits. Primarily, we're targeting low-income households right now. So if you have an event or know of an event or want to host an event with us, we would love to collaborate with you to get more energy kits out in the community. We also, the third bullet, we have material to do emergency preparedness kits. And so we would like to similarly host an event with you to get those materials into people's houses and making sure that they're prepared for disasters regardless of what they look like. We are talking to DT about a bunch of engagement opportunities to really collaborate on our shared objectives. In, I think, 10 days or so, we're hosting our 3rd Solar Energy Forum, where we invite all of the installers from the region, anyone that works in the Ann Arbor service territory, and we get together and we talk about where Ann Arbor is with our goals and our priorities, where their pain points are. We bring in the building department and we collaborate to understand how we can support more energy jobs in our region and more energy installations within our region. We're going to launch our 820 Ambassadors program. These are for any open to any resident who wants to be deeply engaged and deeply understand what the 820 program looks like. It's an 8-week training curriculum. It'll be 2 hours each. It's intense, and we're excited to pilot this. We'll launch it in November, and we need your help recruiting people into this. And then we will be hiring our program coordinators for that Aging in Place grant. Solarize expansion. These last few slides are doing great. We are looking to expand to more residential units, as I mentioned before. We're looking at commercial opportunities. We've mostly focused residential. We need to get into the commercial sector, and that looks a little bit different. We also have started a battery program. So we're getting information. In fact, about a half of the people in the most recent cohort got solar and battery storage, which is really interesting. So we're trying to understand how we can support people who may want to do solar and storage, or just want to do batteries for another reason. I don't have a battery. I'd be interested in a battery because I already have solar. But a battery can be your generator. And so how do we kind of meet different people in the market in different ways? And then we focused a lot on rooftop. We're working on ground mounted options because not everyone has a viable rooftop. We're going to be launching our stakeholder committee for our green rental efficiency initiative, and we need your help identifying stakeholders. And then continued ongoing community engagement is critical for us, especially during this really challenging time. So we're doing an event with the chamber. I'm not sure it's on our calendars yet, but I think it's going to be early October. So we'll be reaching out to all of the members of the chamber and having an interactive session with them. And then we're putting together a solar options event, which talks about all of the different ways someone could engage with solar, not just on their roof, not just in a ground mounted system, but through DTE's program or through an alternative offset program. We want to let people know there's a lot of options available to them. And very excitingly, today, we are officially announcing with you the 10,000 tree planting campaign. So we have a goal of planting 10,000 trees. It's in the 820 initiative. You can read it in the plan, but we are bumping that up. And we made the decision to do this because during COVID, you can still plant trees and you can still care for trees. And we are Tree City and we care about this infrastructure. And so we want to move this goal forward. And I want to move this goal forward in 18 months. I want to hit this goal. I want to celebrate this as a major accomplishment that we did as a community. We are hiring a temporary person to help us create this initiative. We're doing it in partnership with Public Works and our urban forester. We are really excited about this potential, and you're going to hear more about this shortly. But it's officially launched as of right now. So join us in the 10,000 Tree campaign. So closing, this is just some of the opportunities to kind of summarize. We could use help if you are so inclined and interested in recruiting stakeholders for our benchmarking committee, our green rental housing committee. The ambassadors program is about to launch. We'd welcome any recommendations you have on who we should be recruiting into that, or even help distributing the ambassadors call. We are really interested in doing ward meetings. So working with all of you so we can be geographically focused. That could be doing energy or emergency kit distribution. It could be just a Q&A. It could be anything, but we would like to work with you to do those. We're going to actively continue our work around policy intervention. Would love to talk to the policy committee about any of those ideas that align with where you'd like to go, so we can be working collaboratively. And we certainly could use your help continuing to advertise the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grants and our solar. Whew. I will stop there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Stoltz. It's 8:51. Work sessions tend to end by 9. Let's have some questions, some very tight questions, please. We'll call it a day at 9 and let people do their thing. But of course, if there are questions that are remaining, I'd encourage folks on council to send it in to staff, and no doubt answers will be provided. Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just one comment. It really, it seems like we're sort of under the thumb of DTE and their mix of energy in some ways, that unless we can reduce our total energy use from them, we're really at their mercy when it comes to mix. They talk about less coal, but it's more natural gas, and they've cut hydro out almost totally and so on. And there is a mix of green, but it's their green. I think without this, I'm concerned about the no net metering. Without net metering as a payback, I can't afford solar on my house. I'm sure many other people are the same way. So that's just a comment. I'd like to be somehow get on the list so I can find out what your office is doing. If we could get that sent to council outside of these press releases. Like as an example, I'd be interested in joining the Solar Energy Forum and finding out who our solar installers are and so on. So I'd appreciate some info on that. The EV readiness ordinance, I spoke with my neighbor who's working on that, Carlene. She reached out to me about that. It makes sense to me. It's sort of a half step to a total electrification ordinance, which I'm kind of trying to bring to council, but we've had some pushback from legal on that. They're concerned that we can't do that yet. But I'm wondering if this isn't a case where we need to kind of lead and take our chances and fight the fight like Grand Rapids is with Consumers Energy. And we should do that. We should fight the good fight with developers here and require this electrification of buildings. So I just want to throw that out there because we talked about that in the past. Just two quick questions. Yeah, I appreciate Julie Ross' participation in this. Is she paid? Is she one of those 15 people that were in your budget for these to oversee these programs? Is Julie paid for her help?
Yeah,
okay.
She's a solarized contractor with us, so she's paid on an hourly rate.
Okay. How did it come to be that Northside Community Center became the resilience hub for our ward?
Yeah. Oh, I just want to grab your last part. Say for your ward, I would say the first. I wouldn't say your ward is done for that point. The reason Northside was selected, we reached out to Derek and other kind of community centers and asked, where do you think this makes the most sense? And in this case, Derek Miller came back and said, I think we can get the biggest impact at Northside because coordination, it's the center of operations for them. And so that allows them to keep by being the central hub, can keep all of their other centers up and operational or coordinate out of it. And then because all the other sites had like piecemeal solar. And so it was a little too complicated to try to figure out how to make that money go as far as we could. And so Northside sort of presented this perfect opportunity to move forward. And with grant dollars, we were ready to run. So that's how we got to Northside. But I wouldn't say it's your only. we're still looking at other places in the first ward.
Yeah, I know that the folks up at Arrowwood had expressed an interest in serving that purpose up
They're
there.
on the list. Yep, they're on the list.
Councilmember Lum, and then if we can have quick questions there. Councilmember Griswold, you had a question before. Maybe I pivot to Councilmember Ramlawi, and we'll see what happens. Maybe call that a day. Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Ranch. Yeah, you've got 5 minutes yet to go, so I'll be quick. First, thank you, Dr. Stoltz. Obviously, you kept very busy over the summer, and thanks for the memo that you sent us a couple of weeks ago on the legislative initiatives. That was a helpful update and overview of the activity that 820 depends on. So I'll send in, as with the other work session, I will send in my questions. Just a couple things, and you don't have to respond tonight. Just if you could, going forward, provide us an update on anything the U of M has done regarding climate action since June and how we're engaging with U of M at this point. Because I noticed on slide 12 that, for example, on the greenhouse gas emissions, most of the improvement was in the commercial buildings, showed 700K metric tons to 300K. And I noted that the U of M footprint is slightly worse. So if you could update us on that. The funding plan that was provided prior to adopting the 820 plan on June 1st included borrowing $46.5 million this fiscal year, fiscal 21. Is that still the plan? And if so, is the amount still about the same? And when do you anticipate we'll borrow the money?
Good question. To the first, really quickly, it's in fact the Pfizer building switch. It went from commercial to UM, so that Pfizer complex is what you see. The emissions move, if that makes any sense. I'm happy to take that and go in more detail offline. To the second, that is a conversation that needs to be revisited based on conversations with Administrator Crawford, pandemic. So there's work to be done on that last piece, and I would welcome an opportunity to give you a written response with a little bit more detail.
Okay. Then I'll send in my other questions. And just one last thing, because you mentioned that you're meeting with the chamber in early October. So I'm not versed in what the scope of the EV readiness ordinance is. I mean, and it would be helpful to know, and you said you're finalizing that with legal and planning, what it would require of residents, businesses, and or developers. And if you can get some input from the chamber community prior to bringing it to council, I think that would be great.
Great, thank you.
I'll send in my other questions. Thanks. Thanks for all your work.
Excellent. I guess let's roll with Councilmember Griswold Ramlawi and then call it a day. Councilmember Griswold.
I was prepared to just give a thumbs up because I thought I was out of town. I mean, out of time, but I'm excited and exhausted. Great job.
Councilmember
Share that
Ramlawi.
sentiment.
Sorry, am I speaking to me? I'm sorry, Mayor Taylor. Thanks, and Dr. Stoltz, thanks for putting all that information to us in the time you did. A lot to go over and much to do still to do. But I have a question regarding electrification, and we're seeing the Planning Commission push developments and favor developments that include all electrification or solar installations or a combination of those. And we're seeing that right now with the Valhalla development that was approved with 454 units, all electric. Is it even possible right now? And I know maybe you don't have that information for me now, but we're going to be asked to look at these developments and approve them based on these assumptions. And do we have the capacity to develop these kind of projects right now?
We do, and in fact, one of the changes that I didn't highlight is sustainability has now got Zach Wass-Smith on our team, sits on the plan review committee and is looking at these things from an 820 lens to try to understand. So the Valhalla project, good or bad, we pushed for it to be all electric. That was something that came out of our office, and we said this is really important and it's possible in this space. So we're going to continue to try to ask up front for things that align with our goals, because it is far cheaper for everyone wanting to develop in our community or anyone to make any impact to do it right the first time than to have to go in and renovate for it. So we're asking for it where we can.
So the infrastructure is there that can deliver the demands.
It's possible. We're also going to work, I'm going to read into your question a little bit. One of the things in our energy strategy is working with BT on a grid analysis to understand where the grid can take additional influx of that kind of electric energy and where it cannot. So where are we going to need DTE to make investments in their infrastructure versus where can the grid take it right now? That's an important kind of technical piece behind the scenes that we're working on advancing with them. Oh,
Are we
amazing energy here.
recommendations? Are we making recommendations without having that information?
DTE is one of our partners in that, so I can't say never. And sorry that it.
So with the planning commission's recommendation for this development, are they making this recommendation based on information that they know that this exists and they could provide the electricity to this site as early as the developers would need it, or does it need to be built and put in?
Good question, and I can't give you the specifics right now, but I can get back to you on the specifics on whether or not the Valhalla project in particular, to make sure I understand, if that grid can handle the additional electrification load. Is that the question?
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. I'll get back to you.
They're based on that information.
Yep, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. And to the indispensable Dr. Stoltz, thank you very much. There is so much going on in 820. It's just it's incredible and inspirational. So to you and to all who work with you and support you, of which there are legion. Thank you. I'd like to extend my thanks to staff with respect to Mr. Hess and what's going on in the transportation sphere. It's something that we all care about quite a lot, and it's encouraging to see so much action. Mr. Forney, do you want to walk us out, and then I'll roll to public comment?
Certainly, I just want to thank the council for your attention and your wonderful questions tonight. And I especially want to thank Craig Hupy, Nick Hutchinson, Thea Jagerlander, and Zach Wass-Smith for being here, but especially Raymond Hess and Missy Stoltz, two incredibly talented staff members who put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the work that they put in for the city. And so I want to thank them for their presentations tonight and their continued excellence. Thank you.
What you said. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. To speak at public comment general time, please dial the number on your screen. That is 877-853-5247. 877-853-5247. If that number does not work, please roll with the toll-free, the toll number on your screen. I believe it's the 213 number, although I don't have it in front of me. When you are connected, please enter meeting ID 915-4656-8673. That is 915-4656-8673. When you're connected, please enter *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. *9. You'll be your turn will be identified by the last 3 digits of your phone number. The clerk will identify you and inform you that it is your time to speak. When it is your time to speak, you will have 3 minutes in which to speak. So please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time has expired. When your time is up, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor to the next speaker. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, did you need me to read that phone number?
If it's not, is it visible on the screen?
I don't have the screen in front of me. I'm just looking at the
Please
Zoom.
read it. My apologies.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
So the toll number is 213-338-8477.
Can you repeat that?
Sure, that's 213-338-8477.
Thank you.
I don't see anyone on the line right now.
We'll wait a moment. Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Council Member Griswold. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.